Word, all lowercase. Once again, it's MB.
Oh, guest, like a guest, Guest.
My name is John Houston, if it matters. I work for the borough president. This is Kimberly Flynn, wherever she is. And we're going to help guide things along tonight. Kimberly is with 9/11 Environmental Action, the community group that's done so much for residents and survivors of 9/11 in the downtown community. We're going to be taking questions. That's why the cards and the pens were on your chairs. If you have a burning question now, write it and hold it up and we'll come pick it up. Give it to one of our volunteers. If you want to wait until you see the presentation and write a question then, please do that. Just raise it and we'll have our volunteers come pick it up. In fact, if you probably noticed outside in the gallery, we have 9/11 Environmental Action representatives who can help you enroll or answer any other questions you might have after the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce the borough president, Gail Brewer.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, John Houston. Thank you, Kimberly Flynn, and thank you particularly Congressman Nadler and everyone who's here, Sally Flynn at the Justice Department, everyone who made this possible. And thank you to Facebook Live, anyone who's watching. So this is our second 9/11 town hall in the borough president's office for the downtown community. And we really, really appreciate this time having the Congressman Nadler. So you may or may not know that the Congressman was and is, in my opinion, the epicenter of passing the law that we're here to discuss tonight, the Zadroga Act, 9/11 Health and Compensation Act. It establishes two programs right here. Number one, health coverage for those affected by 9/11 in the weeks and months and years after the attacks, under what's called the World Trade Center Health Program, one of which is written by Dr. Joan Reben, who you'll hear from, and she does a great job of explaining it. And compensation for those who were killed, who have become sick, or for the families of those who have died as a result of the attacks under the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund, known as VCF. It's administered by another one of our printers tonight, Rupert, I never pronounce Bakacharian, whose title is Special Master, and she really is a special master and very, very accessible. Passing the Zadroga Act was a bipartisan effort in Congress, something that's very different in today's terms. So Congressman Nadler, Congresswoman Maloney, and Congressman Peter King, along with Senator Schumer and Gillibrand and the entire New York congressional delegation, they all acted together, Republicans and Democrats, and a lot of you helped. It wasn't alone. So the WTC health program is now permanent, and the VCF was extended to 2020. But the two programs have been successful. You'll hear more. Everyone here knows there's a strong chance that the VCF will not have enough money. I'm sure the Congressman will talk about that, to fully compensate all who deserve it, and will in fact close in 2020, just as the cancers from 9/11 are rising. And I'm sure there are people in the room, but I have several friends who are in that situation right now. Unless the new bipartisan bill that has just been introduced by our federal members of Congress, including Congressman Nadler, who will have to work another miracle, So I want to thank everyone who comes tonight, because not only are you going to get your personal questions answered, but also you'll learn more about what we need to do as New Yorkers to be advocates. So without further ado, I would very much like to introduce the very special and the very great Congressman Jerry Nadler.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Borough President Gail Brewer for hosting this event, and to the 9/11 Environmental Action for co-sponsoring, and to Joan Reidman for being there from the beginning and being one of the great pioneers of all this, and Kimberly Flynn ditto. I'm glad to be here with so many friends and colleagues from many, many years of work on this issue. Since 9/11 itself, we've been working together to make sure that all the heroes of 9/11, those who worked on the pile, those who cleaned up and rebuilt the neighborhood, those who worked here, those who went to school here, who returned to their homes and revitalized their neighborhood, have been taken care of. And Gail mentioned that there were 2 programs in the bill. Actually, there are 4. There are, which nobody notices, but it's very interesting as a bit of political archaeology. There are 2 identical victims' compensation programs. One for survivors, that is to say everybody who lived here or worked here, one for first responders. There are 2 identical health programs in the bill. They are identical. One for survivors, one for first responders. Why? Because it is a remnant of the behind-the-scenes political fight between those who supported the bill but wanted it to be limited only to first responders, and those who also wanted it to be for everyone else affected in the neighborhood. We won, but we won at the very end, and so we didn't have time to put them into the most neat form, so we have technically 4 programs, 2 sets of identical programs, but they are identical. So many of us, our family members, friends, colleagues, and neighbors have been affected by 9/11. The toll of the toxins that were released into the air has been significant and is sadly ongoing and will be. One of my proudest accomplishments in Congress after over a decade of fighting was the passage of the 9/11 Health and Compensation Act of 2010. This bill has meant that if you were affected by 9/11 and need health care, you can go to one of our centers of excellence and get quality expert care by doctors like Dr. Joan Reidman, who has been working with patients affected by 9/11 since anyone first began to suspect that there were specific conditions associated with World Trade Center exposures, and continues to lead the way in care of 9/11 survivors. It has also meant that since its opening or reopening in 2011, the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund has been able to distribute so far over $4 billion to over 20,000 claimants in compensation for those who lost loved ones, for those who lost their ability to work and who need help as a result of 9/11, under the leadership of Special Master Rupa Bhattacharya, I think it is, and her predecessor. I'm proud that we were able to pass the legislation that created these and funded these programs which served so many. But our work in Congress is still not done. 3 years ago, in 2015, we were able to reauthorize the bill. It was a struggle, but we reauthorized the bill, extending the coverage of the health program for 75 years, essentially making it permanent for those affected. The Victims' Compensation Fund was extended for 5 years. We knew we'd have more work to do. And now the Victims' Compensation Fund is set to expire in 2020. But the cancer rates among 9/11 survivors continue to rise, as we knew they would, because cancers have long dormancy periods. And we have recently learned that it may well run out of money. The Victims' Compensation Fund may well run out of money even before the expiration date. That's why just last Friday, we introduced bipartisan legislation in the House and Senate to permanently reauthorize and extend the Victim Compensation Fund. So 3 years ago, we, for all practical purposes, permanently reauthorized the health part of the bill. We extended the Victims' Compensation Fund for 5 years. Now we have to take care of the rest and reauthorize the Victims' Compensation Fund indefinitely. We will fight for this legislation in Congress, just as we have fought together at every turn. Now, I'm hopeful that Republicans and Democrats will be able to come together and see this through, so that we can guarantee that those suffering from 9/11 related illnesses do not have to worry that they will be left unable to provide for their families. I'm sorry I can't stay for much of the rest of this event, but it has been my honor to work with so many individuals and organizations in this room on this issue. And it's my honor to introduce in a moment, well, let me just say one other thing before I reintroduce her. In the bill that we just introduced, which extends the VCF indefinitely, we are changing one feature, and that is, instead of having a number, we hereby authorize X billion dollars. We will authorize such funding as may be, such sums as are necessary. That means that it's indefinite funding. It means it's subject to appropriation every year, but that's a heck of a lot better than saying it's X billion dollars and maybe you guess wrong, even if you have a high figure. As I said, I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of the event, but it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Joan Reibman, the Medical Director of the World Trade Center Health Programs Survivor Program, and Special Master Rupa Bhattacharya from the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund.
Thank you. I also want to thank John over there, Phil, who's standing over there, and always in the back, and always our advocate and our hero. Thank you very much, John.
So, good evening, and it's a pleasure of sorts to be here this evening, and it's a real honor, I have to say, to be here with these people who have fought so hard. Is this mic on?
I got to talk right into it.
I got to talk right into it.
Yep.
I'm sort of almost in tears. It's a real honor to be here with people who have fought so hard for this program. And many of us have been doing it for a long time, and we've aged enormously. What I want to do today is just give you again a summary of the program for the survivors. So it's called the World Trade Center Environmental Health Center. And it's called that because when the city first gave us funding, I was in a car with Terry Miles, who was the executive director, and he said, "What are we going to call the program? What are we going to call the program?" Neither of us had any idea, and we decided we'd call it the World Trade Center Environmental Health Center because it had to do with World Trade Center health of the community, but also...
Excuse me, the mic's not working. We're going to swap mics real
Okay.
quick. Sorry, when you started.
That's okay.
Oops.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, is this better? Does this work? Great. Anyway, we called it that because we thought that the World Trade Center illnesses would be confined to World Trade Center, but we hoped that we could help people and also learn from them. So we called it environmental for a reason. Anyway, what I want to do this evening is give you a little bit of the overview of the World Trade Center health programs under the James Zadroga Health and Compensation Act, talk a bit about the Environmental Health Center Survivor Program, and the Survivor term is a term that came out of the battle to get funding for the program, how the program interfaces with the VCF, and very, very briefly about where we are today, talking about one area. So again, as Congressman Nadler told you, there are a variety of programs. There are the health screening and treatment programs. This should really say the New York City Department of Health program, which is an epidemiologic program, and the Victims' Compensation Fund. The health screening and treatment program provide, which we now call the World Trade Center Health Program, really began as centers of excellence. They enroll responders and community members, and as you heard, it was a real battle to get the community members involved in this program. The enrollment is open, and they provide clinical screening and treatment. And this is in contrast to the World Trade Center, to the Department of Health Registry, which is really an epidemiologic program, which is closed to enrollment but continues to send out surveys, and it's really, really critical that everybody respond to those. Oops, sorry. Ooh, this is very sensitive. If we think about the screening and treatment programs, there really are, I would say, 4 programs. There's the program for the fire department, the FDNY program, the programs for the responders, of which there are many programs within that, the community members or survivor program, and the national program. These programs developed differently, and the services for these programs are similar overall, but there are some nuances and differences in them. There we go. So I give this very, very briefly, just to give you a bit of history, which is that originally there were federally funded screening programs for the fire department and the responders, and nothing for the community members. The community member illnesses became noted really with some of the early respiratory studies that were done in the community, and many of you were involved in that and helped out with those. There then was philanthropic funding for treatment. So these were initially screening, but no treatment. There was actually philanthropic funding, the largest of which came from the Red Cross, although initially for the survivors, there were a self-funded program actually out of Bellevue Hospital. The Red Cross then stepped in with the original philanthropic funding, and then eventually for the survivors, there was city funding. For the responders, there was federal funding, and then eventually the federal funding went as a grant for the survivors as well. And all of this ended, as you just heard so eloquently from Congressman Nadler, in the passage of the James Zadroga Health and Compensation Act of 2010. And this provided, there we go. Funding for the World Trade Center Environmental Health Center, which is located now at 3 sites, Bellevue Hospital, Gouverneur at Madison Street, and Elmhurst in Queens. So who is eligible for this program? Well, one has to be what's called an eligible survivor, according to NIOSH, who now oversees this program. And a survivor is a person who was present in the New York City disaster area or in the dust cloud on September 11, 2001, or a person who worked, lived, or attended school, performed childcare or adult daycare in the New York City disaster area. And there are limits to this, so at least 4 days during the 4-month period beginning September 11, 2001 and ending January 2002, or at least 30 days through July 31st, 2002. So there are limits in how, the extent of exposure one had to have. Or also because of how we developed any person who worked as a cleanup worker or performed maintenance work in the New York City disaster area. And there are time limits and exposures on all of that. The geographic boundaries for the survivor population for the treatment programs are shown here, a little hard to see, but one has to be below. I'm having a moment here. Thank you. I knew Kimberly would have it below Houston Street. And also there's a border for Brooklyn as well. So in order to be in the World Trade Center Health Program, one has to have a certifiable condition. This is very different from the responder program, where one can be screened if one had an exposure, but you don't have to have a certifiable condition to continue to be monitored. In the survivor program, one has to have a certifiable condition to stay in the program and to be monitored. So one has to have a defined exposure, and it has to be that the medical or mental health condition is substantially likely to have been caused, aggravated, or contributed to by the exposure. And this is actually a legal term in a way. And for many of us in the health process, this is difficult for us to really sort of understand this terminology. But that decision, whether one has a certifiable condition, is determined by the exposure, by the duration exposure, by the type of injury, and the timing of injury, as well as different criteria for different conditions. So the conditions that we now cover include aerodigestive disorders. So that includes upper airway disorders, chronic runny nose or rhinitis, chronic or acute episodes of sinusitis, that's inflammation of the sinuses in the forehead, in the cheeks, next to the nose, asthma, COPD, bronchiectasis, interstitial lung diseases, acid reflux, and the timing of the onset of the symptoms for these is prescribed by the program and has to occur within a certain time frame. The timing of the onset, not the diagnosis. And this is very important because we understood that the diagnoses for these might differ for different people, different providers. Someone might call someone chronic bronchitis or episodic bronchitis, or might not call it asthma. So it's really the timing of the onset of the symptoms of shortness of breath, cough, wheeze, etc. Acute traumatic injury is also considered a covered condition. But in order to get certified for that, one has to have really good documentation of treatment that occurred within a defined time period. And this becomes difficult for many people. Many people lost their records when St. Vincent closed. So it becomes a working process that we help you to work through. As you know, cancers became covered conditions in 2011. And they were covered because of documentation from the firefighters showing an increased incidence. Incidence means new onset. Some documentation by the registry, but really because of biologic plausibility. That is, understanding that the components of the dust and fumes had the potential to cause these cancers. They include blood and lymphoid tissue cancers, any childhood cancer, breast cancer, ovarian, and invasive cervical, that should say, not non-invasive. Digestive system cancers, eye, orbit, head and neck, respiratory system, urinary system, skin, soft tissue, thyroid, and also some rare cancers. Again, there's a timing of onset that has to be looked at for each of these cancers. Also, we cover mental health conditions, PTSD, depression, panic, and substance abuse, again, depending on the relatedness to the World Trade Center exposure and time and temporal timing. So why is it important to enroll in the World Trade Center Survivor Program? One, we provide treatment with an interdisciplinary group, and by that I mean a group of people who are pulmonologists, GI specialists, ear, nose, and throat specialists who are now quite familiar and used to seeing many of the conditions that people are presenting with. There's access to mental health treatment with psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. This treatment could be individual or group and depends on what's needed. Let's get this going. Okay. We do not do cancer care per se because we're not trained to do that. There are so many cancers, there are so many different needs. So what we provide instead is a care management program for support and coordination of cancer care. So we can certify the cancer, and then our care management team will help guide where your coverage of that by approved programs and providers. That was until recently performed by an outside group. In the last few months, actually, we have had to create our own care management, and we now have a wonderful group of oncology nurses who really understand these diseases, who work with you to help make sure that this is a transition and that you are getting the appropriate care and coverage. This is also only for cancer treatment that's approved standard of care according to the NCCN guidelines. We also will call you back for monitoring visits. In these visits, we understand what's going on with you. Do you have new illnesses? Have your illnesses gotten better or worse? We also offer cancer screening for colorectal cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer, and lung cancer, if appropriate, according to NCCN guidelines. We also provide pharmacy coverage for treatment of certified conditions and coverage of durable items for certified conditions. Sorry, this is not. However, there are some nuances between the responder programs and our programs. So as I said before, the FDNY and responder program can do screening whether or not you have a certified condition. We can only do screening and monitoring if you have a certified condition. Moreover, for the FDNY and responders, the World Trade Center program is the primary payer. They are the first payer. For the Survivor program, we are the secondary payer, i.e., we will ask for your insurance first, but what your insurance does not cover, co-pays, deductibles, then the program will cover those. So we ask that people get insurance if possible, and we will bill your insurance first. This is according to law. Now, initially, the healthcare screening programs worked separate from the VCF. We were developed as a separate program. And we were considered neither a screening program nor a pass-through program. But the VCF rules were modified so that VCF eligibility required World Trade Center Health Program certification. And so now we are partners, although clearly there are differences. I haven't cursed yet, but I'm getting close. One of the differences is that there are different geographic boundaries, and this is very, very important. We began early. We tried to be inclusive. In fact, our original boundary was 14th Street, river to river. That was one of the community meetings, if you remember. Then we had to narrow it down. And the VCF is different. It's even more narrow. So this is important to understand going forward. We will still treat you with our boundaries, but VCF boundaries are different. Also, this meant that we had suddenly a lot more people trying to get in the program. So last year when we met, there were a lot of people who were very upset because phone calls weren't being answered. People couldn't get into the program. We were really very, very much overwhelmed. We had our capacity and our systems were completely overwhelmed. So there were delays in scheduling new patients, as well as delays in follow-up, as well as delays in monitoring. And this was a major problem. So in the past year, we have met with the government again. We have changed the contract somewhat. We've added new components to the clinic. Oops, sorry. We've, because of this increase in enrollment numbers, due to the addition of cancer, due to the legal outreach, we've had 2,800 individuals who enrolled but had not had an appointment. So this was a major problem. So we've now added providers, we've added support staff, including changing our telephone service. We've asked for help from other programs, so NYU Responder Program actually stepped in and started seeing patients. And there is now a new program that's been developed, which is the William Street Clinic that just recently opened. And in fact, many of the people who we had not been able to see, of that 2,800, have now been referred over to the William Street Clinic, and they are contacting these patients. I'm not going to tell you much about what we're seeing, other I just want to give you some quick overview. Now, one of the differences also between the Responder Program and our program is that we are 50% women. It's very different than the Responder Program, and the diseases we see are different. So we're not, we can't tell you incidence or prevalence of cancer. The patients who come into our program are self-referred. Many of them, or most of them with cancers, come in because they have a cancer. But it's very important to understand what we're seeing. And to date, actually not to date, this is of June, we have about 1,500 individuals who have a cancer of one sort or another. Many of these people have multiple cancers, and that's very important to understand, that many people are coming with more than one cancer. The most common cancer we're seeing is, in fact, breast cancer, very different than the Responder Program. It's very difficult for us to know, is that related to World Trade Center or because people are self-referring? We don't really know the answer to that. We also see a lot of prostate cancer, some skin cancer, a lot of lung cancer, thyroid, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, leukemias, head and neck cancers, and kidney cancers. But we can't tell you from this information whether these are increased compared to the general population or not. We really need to rely on the New York City Department of Health data to help us with that, because we are a self-referred population. What we can do, and we are trying to understand, is are these cancers presenting in the way that they would present in other populations? Are we seeing more people with multiple cancers? Are these cancers more or less or the same aggressiveness? And that's what we're trying to understand in the future, and we hope that we can come back with answers for you. And I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me in the back? Yeah? No? Okay. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rupa Bhattacharya. I'm the Special Master for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. Thank you all very much for having me. I wanted to thank Congressman Nadler and Bureau President Brewer for having us here today, as well as 9/11 Environmental Action. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all and give you some information about our programs. I wanted to introduce my two Deputy Special Masters who are going to be joining me in telling you a little bit about the VCF. Jordy Feldman, Deputy Special Master, is the director of our New York office. Stephanie Langsam, Deputy Special Master, runs all of our operations out of the DC office. And so they're going to help me go through some of this for you. The most important thing that I'm going to tell you today is on this very first slide, which is our website at www.vcf.gov and our helpline number at 1-855-885-1555. We have a lot of information on the website, including a version of this presentation, and our helpline is available 5 days a week to answer any questions that you have. And so if you have questions that we can't answer today, we do urge you to reach out to the helpline and see if you can get the questions answered from them. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about overviewing the VCF. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the VCF is, what our progress has been to date. I'm going to then turn it over to Jordy, who's going to talk about the eligibility criteria. I'll come back and talk about compensation, and then Stephanie will talk about some of the logistics about how to file a claim and how the VCF processes claims. So what is the VCF? The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund provides compensation for losses suffered by individuals who are physically injured or relatives of those who were killed as a result of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, or the debris removal efforts thereafter. One of the biggest misconceptions that we hear about the VCF is that this money is limited to first responders. It's not. This money is available to anyone who was in the area of the World Trade Center attacks or in the area of the Pentagon or Shanksville and who were exposed to the toxins associated with those attacks. It's available to EMS, fire, police, of course, the first responders, but it's also available to office workers, teachers, students, people who lived in the area, residents, even people who were just passing through. And we'll talk a little bit more about what sorts of presence requirements you need to meet to qualify for our program, but it's very important to understand that this money is not reserved for first responders. It is a larger program than that. We'll do questions at the end, if that's all right. So let me talk a little bit about our progress to date. So to date, we have received over 77,000 unique registrations. That means someone who had a unique Social Security number has registered with the program. Now, registration is very different from filing a claim. And all three of us are going to talk about this because it's very important. The most important thing you can do right now today is go register with the VCF. You do not need to be sick. You do not need to be certified. You do not need to plan to file a claim in the future. You just have to register. It's very simple. Name, Social Security number, date of birth, address. It holds your place in line. It does not waive any legal rights. It just gives you a claim number so that if you need it in the future, you have it available to you. And so we urge everyone to register with the VCF today if you have not already done so. If you don't know whether or not you are registered, you may have done so in the past, but you're not sure, call the helpline. They'll be able to look it up for you and tell you whether or not you already have a claim number. So we have over 77,000 registrations. About half of those, 39,000, have actually filed claims. Of the 39,000 claims, we have made over 25,000 eligibility determinations. More than 21,000 claimants have been found eligible for compensation. And we have made initial award determinations on over 19,000 of those eligible claims. So nearly 94% of claimants who have been found eligible have already received compensation in the program. The total amount to date is just over $4.4 billion awarded. That means we have almost $3 billion left. I know you heard Congressman Nadler talk about the fear that the VCF may be running out of money. I wanted to be sure to address that up front. This is not an immediate crisis. We have over $3 billion left in the program to award. We have almost 2.5 years to go. This is not an immediate crisis, but I would not be doing my job if I were not keeping an eye on the longer term issue and making sure that people were aware of what was going on. So yes, there's been a lot of talk recently, there's been a lot of media recently about the VCF running out of money. Please don't let that discourage you from filing a claim. We're here, we're open, we're ready to take your claims, and we're ready to decide them, and we have plenty of money for now to go around. I'm going to turn the podium over to Jordy, although I think she's going to speak from there, and she's going to talk a little bit about our eligibility criteria and what it takes to be eligible for the VCF.
Okay, thanks, Rupa. Is this working? Yep. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Jordy Feldman. As Rupa said, I'm a Deputy Special Master of the Fund. It's good to see a lot of you here. So I'm going to go over the criteria you need to be eligible to file a claim to receive compensation from the program. To be eligible for compensation, you have to do these items that are on the board. The first three of which apply to everyone, and the fourth only applies in certain circumstances. So you have to timely register your claim. You heard Rupa say it. I'll get into it in more detail, and I know Stephanie will talk about it again at the end because it really is the most important first step you need to take. Secondly, you have to be certified for a physical health condition by the World Trade Center Health Program. Third, you have to demonstrate that you were present at a 9/11 crash site or along the routes of debris removal at any point from September 11th through May 30th, 2002. And then the fourth item, if you had a 9/11 related lawsuit, you have to demonstrate that the lawsuit was timely dismissed, withdrawn, or settled by the appropriate deadline. So the VCF is an alternative to litigation. You do have to waive your rights to file a lawsuit. There are some exceptions, some limited exceptions. And like I said, this doesn't apply across the board, but it is something to keep in mind if you had filed a lawsuit. Okay, so I'm going to go through the first three items that apply to everyone one by one. The first item, the first criteria is timely registration. So as Rupa said, the first thing that you should do is register now. Even if you're not sick, go online, call our helpline, and register your claim. Registration preserves your right to file a claim in the future if you get sick. It doesn't waive any legal rights. It doesn't obligate you to file a claim in the future. It simply preserves your right to file a claim in the future. One thing that comes up a lot, we do a lot of outreach events along with the health program. We are very close partners, but we were reopened under the same statute, but we are separate programs. And so something that is really important to keep in mind is that even if you are registered and enrolled in the World Trade Center Health Program, that does not mean it is a separate enrollment and registration for the for the Victim Compensation Fund. You have to register for each program separately. Like I said, it's very simple. You can call our helpline. That was on the first slide. I think it will appear again at the helpline number at the last slide. You can go online to our website at www.vcf.gov. Just one thing to note there is that there are you've probably seen a lot of advertisements and taxis on subways. There are a lot of law firms that represent claimants in front of the VCF. You don't need a lawyer. But one thing to look out for is that our website is .gov. There are some websites that look like they're our program's websites that will have you fill out an intake form and tell you whether or not you are eligible. Our program will not do that. We would never just tell you on the website, oh yes, you're eligible to apply. So just be sure when you're looking on the website that you're at vcf.gov. So what does timely registration mean? It means it's determined by your individual circumstances. And for those of you who saw, there were handouts outside that lay out the different registration deadlines. The deadline is set by statute. There are some areas in the program where the special master has discretion. This is limited with some very minor exceptions, as I'll mention in a bit. But in general, you have to register within 2 years of when you knew or reasonably should have known that you had a physical harm as a result of 9/11 and that you were eligible to file a claim. So what does that mean? We've looked at that requirement to mean that a government entity, city, state, federal, told you that your condition was related to your 9/11 exposure. So this is something that we had heard many times. Kimberly Flynn was very helpful in focusing us on this issue about people who were diagnosed maybe many years ago with a condition, with asthma, and knew that they were living downtown or working downtown around 9/11, but never connected the dots. There was never any like aha moment that their asthma could have been caused by 9/11 or some other condition. So we don't start running the clock until a government entity has determined that your condition is 9/11 related. For most people, that 2-year time period runs from the date, if you are a member of the World Trade Center Health Program, the date that of the certification letter, the letter that notifies you that you have been certified for one or multiple conditions. For city employees or for city employees, it could be a determination from NYSERS. Or the fire pension fund, police pension fund, that your condition is 9/11 related. But that is the period when your registration deadline starts to run. You have to register within 2 years of that date. It is our policy that if you are timely for one condition, then all conditions are considered eligible for compensation. So, for example, if you were certified by the health program in March 2014 for asthma, and you are recently diagnosed with cancer, you didn't know about the program, you didn't register your claim at that time. As long as you register within 2 years of the later certified condition, we will consider you eligible for compensation for all of those conditions. I will say something that we've seen more and more is that, we've tried to do a lot of outreach to get the word out about our program and the fact that it's not limited to first responders, it's not limited to local responders. It is available to people who worked in the area. And so while the deadline is statutory, and if you miss your deadline, we encourage you to register your claim, even if you were certified for a condition more than 2 years ago. In that instance, we will deny your claim, but I want to make it very clear that is not the end of the road. We encourage you, if you are denied, to appeal the award. We have an appeals process that is set up to give you the opportunity to explain why you missed the deadline. You weren't aware that you were eligible to file a VCF claim. Our office is right down the street at 290 Broadway. I know Stephanie will talk about our hearings process, but I do just want to reassure you that if you have been registered for have been certified for more than 2 years, you should still register your claim. And when you are denied, please don't think that's the end of the road. There is an appeals process to allow you to tell your story. The other eligibility component is that you have to have an eligible condition. That means that you have to have a certified physical health condition from the World Trade Center Health Program. As Dr. Reibman said, there is quite a lot of overlap in our programs, but there are also some differences. One of the main differences is that by statute, we can only compensate for physical health conditions. So while you may be certified for a mix of physical and mental health conditions, for VCF purposes, we can only compensate you for the physical conditions. we do generally rely on a certification from the health program that a condition is eligible for treatment. There are some very, very limited circumstances to allow you to apply for our private physician process, where we follow the same criteria as the health program does to determine if you have sufficient exposure and if the latency periods for cancer or onset periods are consistent with those that are set forth by the health program. It is, like I said, it's a very limited process for situations where someone would suffer significant hardship if they were forced to go there, or some other situations that are set forth on our website. Like I said, our program and the health program work very closely together. We exchange information about the conditions for which a person is certified. And so that does very much alleviate the burden on you also to provide us with information about your conditions. As long as you are, as long as we get that information from the health program, which we get on an ongoing basis, you do not need to prove that your condition has been certified. We get that information independently. Okay, and the last component is presence. You have to demonstrate that you were present at a 9/11 crash site or along the routes of debris removal at any point from September 11th, 2001 to May 30th, 2002. So for purposes of the VCF, the 9/11 crash site is defined by statute as any area south of Canal Street. I saw you ask the question as Dr. Ryman was speaking. Those zones are a little bit different. The health program zone is south of Houston Street and covers some areas in Brooklyn. Ours is a little bit narrower and south of Canal Street. And unlike the health program, we do not have a minimum duration for presence. So it may be that you were, in the area just shopping at Century 21 on 9/11. Or it may be that you had, you were passing through at some other point. There are specific timing requirements you need to meet in order to satisfy exposure for purposes of being certified for treatment. But for purposes of establishing presence, there's no minimum time requirement. So how do you prove it? That's a question we get a lot. And what I want to say at the outset is that we understand that it is 17 years after the fact, that with the passage of time, you may have changed jobs, you may have moved apartments, you may have lost touch with former colleagues, you may have lost certain paperwork. We understand all of that. And so but we also have certain requirements as a government program to make sure that we have enough information in the file to provide compensation. So we accept a broad range of documents. If you worked in the area, if you can get a letter from your employer saying that you were employed and this was your workstation and that you were there, in that time period. If you can get sworn affidavits from coworkers or neighbors, school transcripts. If you went to see the doctor in that time period and you have medical records from that time, we will accept that. We generally require two forms of proof, and there is no magic formula. It's not like two affidavits or one affidavit and an employer letter. We will look at the totality of the circumstances. We understand in certain circumstances we would expect it to be easier to get information if there's an employer who still exists versus someone who came down and volunteered and didn't know the people that they were working alongside or something like that. So we will consider that when determining presence. And we also do have some third-party partners who we will reach out to independently or we can get information from. As Dr. Ryman mentioned, the World Trade Center Health Registry, which if you filled out one of those surveys, those WAVE surveys, in the years after 9/11, we can use that as a piece of proof to support your claim for presence. And we can get that information directly from the registry as long as you fill out a certain authorization form for them. Just like with the timeliness issue, if you apply and we deny your claim because we say there's insufficient proof of presence, again, that is not the end of the line. We have many hearings where it's just a matter of, I don't have as much documentary proof as I wish I did, but here's my story. And so we will be there to listen to it, and you can establish presence by coming in for a hearing that way. You would just testify under oath and say what you were doing and when, and we can consider that as part of the totality of the claim. And then I'm just gonna breeze through this because we've touched on it earlier on in the presentation, but there is a lot of overlap between our program and the health program, but there are some differences. Again, we only cover physical conditions. The health program covers both physical and psychological. Our presence zone is south of Canal versus south of Houston for the health program. The exposure time period ours is a little bit shorter. We run through May 30th, 2002. The health program, for purposes of exposure, runs through the end of July of 2002. And like I said, there's no minimum time required for presence, whereas there are for the exposure for the health program. And then importantly, I know Congressman Nadler talked about there being 4 separate programs but identical for VCF purposes, and that is 100% true. We make absolutely no distinctions between if you are a responder, survivor, in terms of the eligibility criteria, the way the claim is processed, how we compute awards. It is identical in every sense. So just keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rupa to talk about compensation.
All right, I'm going to stand up so I can see the back of the room. So I'm going to talk briefly about how we calculate compensation. One of the very unique things about the VCF is that by statute, in order to calculate compensation, we're required to look at the individual circumstances of each claim. And so we do these calculations very much on an individualized basis. That said, there is a sort of very basic formula for how we look at the whole issue of compensation writ large. And basically, the formula is non-economic loss plus economic loss minus collateral offsets equals the VCF award. Each claim is evaluated individually. So what does all that legalese mean? So let's go through it one component at a time so you can understand a little better how this works. So the first component of a VCF award is non-economic loss. Non-economic loss is what is traditionally known as a pain and suffering award. The most important thing about non-economic loss is that every claimant who is eligible, so if you meet those criteria that Jordy talked about, you filed a timely registration, you were present in the zone, you had a certified health condition, and you did what you needed to do with your 9/11 lawsuit, every claimant who meets those criteria qualifies for non-economic loss minus any applicable offset. And the main thing that's being offset from non-economic loss awards are any settlements that were obtained in those 9/11 related lawsuits. So you don't have to prove anything other than eligibility in order to get a non-economic loss award minus any applicable offset. So how do we decide what is non-economic loss? So non-economic loss, or that pain and suffering award, varies by the type, severity, and effect of the conditions that the claimant suffers and the effect of those conditions on daily life. It is not tied to the number of certifications. This is a question we get a lot. and it's one that we always try to disabuse people of. We're not looking at how many certified conditions a claimant has. We're looking at the sum total aggregate effect of the conditions the claimant suffers on their daily life. Why is that? Well, it may be that someone has 6 certified conditions, but they're 6 certified respiratory conditions, but they're all very well controlled by medication. They're continuing to work. It doesn't affect their activities of daily living. Whereas one person who has one very bad certified condition that can't be controlled by medication, is in the hospital repeatedly, is on oxygen, that person will warrant a higher award than the person with the 6 conditions that are well controlled. So we're not looking at the number. We don't look at the number of conditions. We look at the effects of those conditions on daily life. One thing to note, we make these determinations based on what the conditions are as they are reported to us by the World Trade Center Health Program. And if you go look at what we call our policy document on our website, it lays out which conditions we consider to be presumptively severe and which ones we consider to be less severe. We do not receive medical records from the health program. All we get from the health program are the names of the certified conditions. And so if you have one of those conditions that are presumptively less severe, but yours manifests itself as more severe, and we know that can happen, right? Those are the cases where we would want to see medical records in order to establish that you would get an award sort of above the baseline. And those are the only cases where you need to file medical records. If you sort of otherwise want to rely on the conditions that you're certified for, we'll make the award based on the list we get from the health program on a sort of a default basis. So what are those awards? So the awards are capped by statute. So the highest award for a non-cancer condition, so these are your respiratory conditions, the musculoskeletal conditions that Dr. Ryman talked about, is $90,000. The highest award for a cancer condition is $250,000. Again, those are capped by statute. And so we are limited by those caps that are in the statute. Now, again, to be clear, the caps only apply to the non-economic loss portion of these awards, not to the economic loss portion of the award that we'll talk about in a moment. And as I said, all eligible claimants do qualify for non-economic loss awards minus offsets. So the second component of the award are the economic loss component. Economic loss has a separate requirement. In order to qualify for economic loss, you have to demonstrate that you have an occupational disability determination from a third party. So somebody else, a governmental entity like Social Security or Workers' Comp or your New York City pension fund, somebody else has to have found that you can no longer work as a result of your 9/11 related condition. And if that is true, if someone else has found that you can no longer work as a result of your 9/11 related condition, then you qualify for what we call economic loss. And what economic loss is basically compensation for lost wages and lost employment benefits because you can no longer work as a result of your 9/11 related condition. So those are very individualized awards. We're looking to see what your salary level is, what your age is, how long you might have been expected to work going into the future. We're looking at what sorts of benefits your employer may have provided you, whether or not you are earning a pension and would have earned more pension credits had you worked longer. We'll look at the date on which the disability started, and we will also look at whether or not the disability is because of conditions that we can't compensate for. So for example, if you are disabled both because of your 9/11 related asthma and your 9/11 related PTSD, we will need to discount the economic loss award because we are barred by statute from compensating for the mental health conditions. So we do look to see whether or not there is a percentage of disability that's attributable to conditions that we can't pay for. But that is how we calculate economic loss. Those awards are, as I said, very individualized. They do take longer to calculate, and so it can sometimes take us a little longer to issue awards in those circumstances. And I think Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about timelines. There are a couple of other pieces of economic loss that we compensate for, but on a very, very limited basis. The first of those is replacement services, what we call replacement services loss. Replacement services is basically an alternative way of calculating economic loss for people who don't have a salary history. So if you didn't work outside the home, if you only worked part-time outside the home, this is a way that we can calculate the lost value of the services that we know you provided in the home and still provide you with an economic loss award. So we do have that option available for people who are in that circumstance. We also do compensate medical expenses loss, but on a very limited basis. We are not a medical expenses program. We are really in the business of trying to compensate people for pain and suffering and for lost earnings. But we recognize that there are people who incurred medical expenses either before the World Trade Center Health Program came into existence and started paying for those health expenses, or who may not have gotten into the World Trade Center Health Program or who incurred expenses before they got into the World Trade Center Health Program. And so we do have that available. It is subject to a threshold of $2,000. And what we've generally done is said that we won't look at those claims, barring extenuating circumstances, except on amendment. In other words, we want you to see what your reward is first before you all have to go to the trouble of collecting a bunch of documentation to support a medical expenses claim, and before we have to go to the trouble of reviewing a bunch of documentation to support a medical expenses claim. But it is available for those of you who need it. The final part of the economic loss calculation is collateral offsets. We are required by statute to subtract from your award or offset from your award benefits that are paid by other entities for the same injury. So if you're receiving a disability pension or Social Security disability benefits that are based on the same injury, if you're receiving workers' compensation benefits based on the same injury, if you received a payment from the Department of Justice's Public Safety Officers Benefits Program, if you got a lawsuit settlement payment, or in a deceased claim, if you're receiving a survivor benefit or a life insurance payment, those amounts will be subtracted from the award in order to get to the amount that the VCF is going to be able to pay you. We're required to do it by statute, and it makes sense. We're not going to double pay for something that somebody else is already paying for. We do not offset charitable benefits, just as a matter of policy. So I am going to turn the mic over to Stephanie, who's going to walk you through some of the process things. How do you file a claim? How do we decide the claims?
No, we are getting close to the end. I know there are some cards going around for questions. If you do have a question and you haven't written it on a card yet, I think we have some people who can hand them out, and then we'll collect them and use them at the end. So Rupa and Jordy spoke a lot about the what, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the how. How do you file a claim now that you understand all of the different requirements to be eligible and how we calculate awards? What? Did I get that right? Okay. So first, filing a VCF claim. There are two things that you need to do. The first, we've all spoken about, I'll be the last to talk about it, registration. The first step is to register. Go ahead and register now. That way you don't have to worry about it later. As Jordy mentioned, there are certain deadlines that are applicable to each person, and we have a handout floating around tonight with that information, but go ahead and register now. Once you've registered, the next step is to then file your claim. And you can do that online or you can do it in hard copy. We generally ask that you register now, but that you wait to file your claim until you have a certified condition. And the reason for that is without a certified condition, we can't process your claim. You can still file it. We'll end up sending you a letter letting you know that we need to wait for your certification, and we'll put your claim in what we call an inactive status, which simply means that we're waiting, and once you let us know that you've been certified by the health program, we'll go ahead and reactivate the claim for review. So when you're ready, you can file your claim online. We have what we believe is a very user-friendly online form. It's very smart. It will ask you certain questions based on your answer to prior questions and will guide you through the form. And it also includes a document checklist. So that checklist gives you the listing of each of the supporting documents that you'll need to submit along with your claim. For those of you who may not be as comfortable with the computer, we do have a hard copy claim form. It is on our website, includes all the same questions, and once we receive those, we end up processing them and getting them into the system. One of the questions we often get is whether you need an attorney to file a claim. And with all due respect to our attorneys who are in the room, you do not need an attorney to file a claim with the VCF. With that said, a little over 80% of our claims are from individuals who are represented by an attorney. That is completely your choice. If you decide to work with an attorney, please know that the fees that the attorney may collect are limited to 10% of your award amount, and that is as dictated by the statute. One of the things that we are most proud of, and in particular for our claimants who are not represented, is our helpline. Rupa mentioned the helpline at the beginning. Jordy mentioned it because you can call our helpline to register by phone. Our helpline team is an exceptional group of individuals who really see themselves as your advocates. We have an extensive outreach program. If we mail you a letter because we're missing some information, our helpline will proactively call you about a week or two after the letter goes out to make sure that you received it, that you understand it, that you don't have any questions about what it is that's missing or what's needed in order to move your claim forward. They do an exceptional job. They also will be happy to schedule an appointment if you want help filing your claim online. You can call them, set up a time, you can sit in front of your computer, and one of our helpline representatives will walk you through the form step by step and make sure that you're able to submit it. So we're really, the group is incredibly dedicated, and they are there to help you. Whoops. All right, so what happens once your claim is filed? There is a handout that is also on our table out front that is the Vcf Claim review process. It's a one-pager. It's in color, and it lays out the steps that happen once you submit your claim. It's also on our website, but I would encourage you to pick up a copy of that if you haven't already. So in general, claims are reviewed in first in, first out order. This ensures that those individuals who have been waiting the longest, that we are reviewing their claims first. We base this on the date that the compensation form is submitted, which in general means that you have submitted your claim form. Our old claim form, going back to prior to August 2016, had two different sections, and so that compensation form was a separate section. Many of you will be filling out the claim form that has existed since August of 2016, and that is just the one claim form. So the time frame for processing the claim depends on a number of factors. The type of claim, whether you're claiming just non-economic loss, the pain and suffering, or whether you're claiming economic loss, which, as Rupa talked about, takes a little more time. All of our claims are individually calculated, so they do get a significant amount of attention. But the time frame can be tied to the complexity of the claim, the type of losses that you're claiming. It's also tied to whether we have the documentation and information that we need in order to process the claim. Right now, we are at about 18 months, although I think it's slightly less because we're working on claims that were submitted in mid-2017. Our goal is to get down to a year or less, and we are making incremental progress there. But know that at the moment we are reviewing claims that were filed in mid-2017, and we will soon pick up claims that were filed in the latter part of 2017. Once you submit your claim, we have a preliminary review activity that happens, and so we will send you a letter if we know up front that we are missing any of the minimally required documents. So there's a short list of documents that we must have. One of them is the authorization that allows us to go to the health program and get information about your condition. We generally will pick up your claim for that preliminary review within a few months, and then we'll send you a letter if we're missing anything and let you know what happens next. And of course, we will always contact you as we're reviewing your claim if there's anything that we're missing. So Jordy mentioned the appeals process as it relates to eligibility decisions, and we do have a very robust appeals process. And we take appeals in two different stages. The first is eligibility, which Jordy mentioned. If you are denied for any of the reasons, whether it's timeliness of your registration, having a certified condition, presence at site, any of those items, if you are denied, your letter will include an appeal form and instructions for how to appeal that decision. We encourage you to do that if that is your circumstance. Come in, it's non-adversarial. You can do it in person, you can do it by phone. We've even done these hearings through Skype. We will accommodate what works best for you, and we ask you to come in and give us that additional information so we can evaluate it. We also have the option, and this is for anyone who receives an award, to appeal the award determination if you believe that it was incorrectly calculated. And again, your award letter will include an appeal form. Every award letter does. And it's up to you. If you believe that a fundamental mistake was made, you can appeal. You have 30 days to appeal, and then we'll go ahead and schedule a hearing and work through that process so you can come in and provide us with the information where you think a mistake was made. Once the hearing is held, the hearing officer writes up a recommendation. It goes to Rupa, and she makes the final decision, and you'll get an updated letter telling you the outcome of that appeal. We also have a very robust amendments process. So this is something else that we tend to get questions about. Oh, thank you. A little warm. That we tend to get questions about. At any point after you have submitted your claim, you may amend it. If you have a new condition, if you have a new loss, if your condition has become more debilitating, perhaps you've been determined to be disabled, at any time, even after you've received your payment from us, any time until December 18th, 2020, you can amend your claim. Provide that new information. We will take a look at it. We'll determine whether or not it warrants a revised decision, and we'll send you a letter with the outcome of that review. We frequently do get amendments to add certified conditions. And one of the things, I think Jordy also mentioned this, or it may have been Rupa, or maybe all three of us have mentioned it. Having a new condition does not necessarily mean an increased award. As Rupa mentioned, it's not tied to the number of conditions. And one of the things that we are very sensitive to, and we know our partners at the health program are sensitive to, are requests for certifications simply for purposes of a VCF award. So if you have been certified and you go back to the health program to seek certification for an additional condition, they are going to look at it from the perspective of whether or not it's already included in your care suite. Are they already treating you for similar conditions, related conditions, in that same suite? Does it change your treatment at all? And one of the things that we often speak with them about is if it doesn't change your course of treatment, It doesn't necessarily warrant a certification from the health program's perspective. And so it's just something to think about when you're looking at your situation, your VCF claim, and your care that you're receiving from the health program. One other thing that we like to talk about is our Expedite process. So we do have a process for individuals who are either terminally ill or facing extreme financial hardship. And by that, we're talking about individuals who may be facing eviction or foreclosure or utility cutoff. If this is a situation that you or someone you know is facing, you can call our helpline. We look for, in the case of a terminal illness, we look for a letter from the physician or some medical records. In the case of financial hardship, we look for some documentation of that hardship. If you are approved for expedite processing, we can generally review the claim, render a decision, and get the payment out within as little as 4 weeks. We reserve this for the extreme cases that I mentioned, but we do take our expedite process very seriously. We do focus a lot of attention on those claims, and we work very hard to be able to get that compensation out as quickly as possible. Once you receive your award, if you do not appeal, then after 30 days, we go ahead and start processing your payment. If you do appeal the award, then once you get the revised decision or updated letter coming out of the hearing, we start the payment process right away. And if you have an expedited claim, we go ahead and pay it as soon as the award is decided, even though you still have the appeal period in case it is a decision that you want to appeal. So, our top 5 takeaways. If you haven't already heard us say it, register now. Go ahead and just get it done online, by phone, call our helpline tomorrow. Very easy, very basic information. Second thing, please get certified by the health program. If you haven't already been certified, if you're not already in the process, start that process. I know there are people here tonight who can talk to you about enrolling in the health program. Go ahead and get certified by the health program. Our third top 5 takeaway is that the VCF is not just for responders. We've spoken about this already. It's for anyone who lived, worked, went to school, had reason to be in the area south of Canal Street and meets the other criteria. Everyone who is eligible qualifies for a non-economic loss award. You can fill out the claim form, provide the minimum documents required, and if you are eligible, you qualify for a non-economic loss award, less any applicable offsets. And then our last takeaway is you don't need an attorney to file a claim. You can call our helpline, and they will be happy to assist you. So for more information, we have our website up here. We have information available in Spanish, Polish, and Chinese. We encourage you to go to the website. One of the parts of the website is called Forms and Resources. We have overview slide deck. We have the claim review process. We have a sheet about frequently asked questions. We have facts about the VCF. All of that is on our website. The Forms and Resources really has a lot of great information. And of course, our helpline. Encourage you to call them as well. And I think with that, we're opening it up to questions. Thank you.
So Kimberly has taken the questions and sorted them by the ones that have the most broad applicability. We've got about 10 minutes. We really have to be out of here by 8:15. So let's try and zip through these.
Does this work? Can everybody hear me? Oh boy. Okay, so I have a large number of questions. And some of these questions can be answered by 9/11 environmental action outside, questions about whether you're a survivor or a responder, questions about how you transfer programs. Questions like that can be answered by us. Many of these questions have already been answered in the course of the very informative presentations that we've heard. If your question is not answered tonight, realize that it we can't really respond to highly personal questions with highly personal details. Some of us will be available after to answer some of those personal questions to the degree that they can be answered. I'm going to hit on a few points that I think really need to be emphasizing, and that did come up in questions. Number one, and this question is for the VCF as well as the World Trade Center Health Program. I think they were asking about both. If you qualify, i.e. you were present, okay, in the various disaster areas, exposure areas, but you are 100% healthy, should you register? Or why? So for the VCF, should you register? Why? And for the health program, should you apply or not? Why?
So for the VCF, can everyone hear me? Is this coming? Yes. The other one is better? Okay. So for the VCF, the answer is yes. We strongly recommend that anyone who was down there, who was passing through the area, who was south of Canal Street, go ahead and register with the VCF. It's easy to do. It doesn't waive any legal rights. It doesn't obligate you to do anything in the future. It holds your place in line. If you get sick later, it's just one less thing you have to worry about.
And quickly for the health program, although we would love to screen you, we really cannot unless you have a symptom or a condition that is potentially certifiable. You don't have to have a diagnosis yet, but you have to have had some symptoms. So I would say you're very lucky, but register for the VCF.
Okay, so this is the next question. I'm gonna combine a few questions. A number of you asked whether you had to have catastrophic illness like cancer in order for it to be worthwhile for you to file with the VCF. And kind of corollary to that question is there a minimum award amount?
So I'm glad you asked the question because it was in my notes and I failed to say it. So our non-economic loss awards, which are the ones that everyone qualifies for if they're eligible, start at about $20,000. So depending on whether or not you have an offset, and in most cases that's going to be a lawsuit settlement, the minimum award, assuming that you have a World Trade Center certified physical health condition, is $20,000, and it goes up from there depending upon the severity of the condition that you suffer from. And just a reminder, we do offset the things that we're required to offset. So some people may not get any award because there's an offset, but the minimum award is about $20,000.
Okay, thank you. And a final set of questions for Joan. These are questions about why certain illnesses that people have developed after 9/11 are not covered, and when they might be covered. So the two that have specifically been asked about are autoimmune diseases and neuropathy, and I know there's also interest in cardiovascular diseases as well.
So, this is an evolving program, and we started with the diseases that we thought were most likely, which were really what would happen when you inhaled the dust and the fumes, and those were really aerodigestive. We were really surprised originally about the digestive component and GERD, but it turned out many people were complaining of that. Over the years, there's been an evolution, of course, in illnesses such as cancer, and the question has been, are those the only illnesses? And the decision is made not by us, it's actually made by the government, by NIOSH, and it's made based on scientific data that can support or not support an illness or a condition. And we don't have yet the data in for autoimmune. It's very interesting. People are looking at it. Autoimmune disorders are being looked at in the fire department, in the responder program. Not so much in the survivor because we don't have the wherewithal so much. Neuropathies have been, illnesses associated with neuropathic symptoms have been raised as well. There are, in fact, ongoing research studies to go on to decide whether this should be fought for. And the third one was?
Cardiac.
Oh, cardiac. Cardiac is very interesting. So these are very, very interesting conditions that need to be thought about. We're looking for the data to support it, but we don't have the final decision in that. That's made by the scientific stack and by the government. So our goal is really to understand, can we do research that will either support or not support these conditions as World Trade Center associated conditions. I can't give you dates.
And one more question for Rupa, if those conditions should be added, what would happen? Would the VCF need to be extended in order to, you know what I'm saying?
Right. So at the moment, if those conditions are added, we would obviously create a new registration requirement. It would go 2 years from the date the condition is added, but no later than December 18th, 2020, because under our current statute, that is our sunset date. And so we will be required to shut down December 18th, 2020. So if the conditions are added in August of 2020, you'll have 4 months to file those claims.
Okay, I know. I'm so sorry. It's been wonderful. I think, we should break now. 9/11 EA is going to be doing other town halls. I have a wonderful question about children and young adults, and that will be addressed.
Do a last one.
Okay.
Do a last question if you want.
Last question?
Yep.
One last question. Okay, I'm gonna ask. You know what? One more, just because a lot of people ask this. Why isn't PTSD or mental health conditions, why are those not compensable by the VCF?
So the short answer is because Congress said they weren't. And there's a longer answer about why that is. Partly it's because in 2000, remember the VCF was originally created, we didn't go through this, but the VCF was originally set up in October of 2001, immediately following the events of 9/11. Had PTSD been a compensable condition in October of 2001, practically the entire country probably was suffering at that time, correct, right? So I think at that time a decision was made that the mental health conditions won't be covered. At that time the decision was actually made by the special master that the mental health conditions won't be covered. When the Zadroga Act was passed in 2010, that limitation was written into the statute. And so we have always labored under that limitation that's written into the statute that we can't compensate for mental health conditions.
Okay, folks, we've got to stop. I'm sorry, we've got to stop. We can talk.
So I will answer that one. So James Zadroga was a New York City police officer who passed away as a result of his 9/11 related condition in 2006.
Folks, before you all peel off, just understand that we will post the archive of this Facebook Live event on Facebook and also on Gail Brewer's YouTube channel. I know we went through a lot of information. The PowerPoint presentation is part of the Facebook, so you'll be able to go at your own pace. Thanks for coming. Mm-hmm.